and thank you everyone for joining us here today. My name is Tony Frost, and I look after Profit's global organization and culture practice. I'm joined today by Lily Wen and Tom Zhang, two of our amazing associate partners in APAC, who deliver a lot of organization and cultural transformation work in the region. Also with me today are Christine Brandt-Jones, who looks after our global insights and analytics capability, and Erin Myers, who's an engagement manager on our team, and she helped to design, execute, and analyze the research that we'll be sharing with you here today. For those of you who might be less familiar with Profit, we're a consultancy that focuses on helping our clients grow and transform. We like to frame this as uncommon growth, meaning that it delights your customers, it empowers your leaders, and it gives you sustainable competitive advantage. To that end, we focus on marketing and sales, creating and activating brands, crafting compelling experiences, creating business innovation, and of course, organization and culture. Today, we're going to lean into the organization and culture part of the growth equation. Broadly, that means addressing 4 questions. How might we define and harness a compelling purpose to drive performance? How might we transform our organization to power growth? How might we build and sustain the capabilities that we need to win in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and increasingly ambiguous world? And finally, how might we create a culture that actually thrives on change? We like to say that uncommon growth begins by unlocking the full potential of human-centered organizations. What exactly is a human-centered organization? It's simple. If you have humans at your company, and who doesn't, you need to build your strategies, your stories, your symbols, your skills, capabilities, processes, systems, incentives, and tools around them. Because at the end of the day, businesses don't change. People change, and then people change your business. We have 4 topics on our agenda. Let's dig into the heart of it right now. So the first is we'd like to talk a bit about why we think culture is a growth catalyst, and it's more relevant than ever. We'd like to introduce our collaboration Flywheel, one of the primary products of this round of research this year, share some key learnings that we think are particularly relevant for companies in Asia, and then share a little client story with you. But first, just a little bit of housekeeping. We'd love for this to be as interactive as you might desire. So please feel free to use the chat function in the lower left-hand to ask any questions or make comments as we're speaking. And there's a Q&A function that you're welcome to use as well if you wish to remain anonymous. Only we can see what you ask there. But first, we have a poll to take together because we'd like to know a little bit about our audience with us here today. So popping up on the screen in the moment, you'll have a choice of which department or functional area you most directly support. And then we'd also be interested to know a little bit about how many full-time employees are part of your company today. I'll give a minute for everybody just to ring in there. Charlotte, whenever it looks like we have a quorum, let's see the results. There we go. So, heavily focused on marketing and strategy today. Not surprising, we serve many of you. I'm curious to know what the other might be. We have someone who's not anything that we put in the list. If you'd be willing to share in the chat what function you represent, we'd be very curious to know. And it also looks like we have a range of organizational sizes, but we're skewed to the larger, with the majority of us being from organizations that have more than 10,000 employees. Very interesting. So marketing and strategy, we're skewed a little bit on the larger size. We'll keep that in mind as questions come up. So, effective collaboration starts with strong culture, and our practice is dedicated to helping our clients strengthen their cultures and unlock the potential of human-centered organizations to drive that uncommon growth we're so obsessed with. We see that too often client transformations struggle to gain traction. And there are patterns that tend to play out in organizations as they pursue that transformation. So one is there is a view that there may be sort of magic bullets, technology or overemphasis on what's new. There's underinvestment in leadership, particularly in middle management. It's a vast audience and it's time consuming to engage. So it can be perceived as too difficult and people just focus on the top of the organization. Sometimes there's a fixation on barriers and challenges and being too concerned about trying to address those without finding time to motivate your employees to keep them going by focusing on the progress you're making along the way. And these tend to lead to a number of different issues that you see here in the middle column, which get in the way of that transformation. And unfortunately, the outcome too often is that nothing changes. I know one organization that I won't name that literally spent not one, not two, but $3 billion on a digital transformation, and then had to admit that they hadn't been successful and had to start again. It's an extreme example, of course, but those things do happen. I see the one person who's just shared, I asked, what was your function? That was not there. It says the chat's disabled, Charlotte, by the way. This person is from the innovation function. Thank you for sharing that. Moving forward, to move past these challenges and enable successful transformation, we've developed a model that fundamentally grounds our work and thinking, and we call it the human-centered transformation model. Why? Organizations, as I said before, are made up of many humans. So therefore, like a human, organizations collectively have DNA, a soul, a mind, and a body. All of these elements work together to comprise your culture, and they need to be in sync in order to drive sustained change. Now, specifically, what do we mean by each of these? DNA, this is who your organization is, as defined by your purpose, your values, your brand, your strategy. This sets the direction of travel for any change that needs to be made. The soul is about the mindsets and beliefs that need to change and how to reinforce those to the day-to-day work environment to create belief among your employees, to ignite belief in the larger group in that new DNA. The mind, this is where we supercharge the workforce, considering the new capabilities that are required to drive change. And also we think about how to develop, attract, and retain talent that create those capabilities for us. And the body, of course, is how we organize ourselves. It's the operating model and organizational science, your processes, your tools, your systems, your incentives, everything that directs the change and helps to organize your efforts. We've conducted global research for the past 4 years to validate this model and understand human-centered transformation at a deeper level. So in 2019, we identified what we call our catalysts. That's why the series is now called Catalysts Today. Those are the key cultural levers that leaders are using to drive transformation. And in that body of research, we uncovered 6 fundamentals, things like pushing decision rights downwards, and 5 accelerators, things like recognizing rewarding progress, not just outcomes, that are part of the model. In 2020, we took a deeper look at those levers to create an actionable playbook for leaders to be able to apply them in a coherent way. And part of what came out of that was the identification of 4 pathways based on what you're hearing in the organization that might be roadblocks to help leaders figure out where to start in the model and address those key cultural barriers. In 2021, given the tremendous change that we've been experiencing in the world, we introduced a model for building an organization's change fitness. So extending the model of the organization as human and thinking about its fitness. Moving from a traditional to a transformational view of change management needed to enable organizations to thrive in a volatile and unpredictable environment. This helps organizations, leaders, teams, and individuals move from viewing change as a threat to seeing change as a positive and opening new growth and opportunities. And now, here we are in 2022, thinking about how as companies must change and adapt to an ever quicker pace with the growing complexity of issues, we recognize that the only way that leaders and companies can thrive now is by working well with others within the organization, what we're calling cross-organizational collaboration. And we discovered during this, as you'll see, that as critical as it is, organizations are still struggling with that. And so we've introduced a model that may help thread the needle. Specifically this year, we explored what it takes to achieve effective cross-organizational collaboration, how a hybrid work environment affects that, the barriers that are holding organizations back today, and what might be gained, both organizationally and personally, if we can get cross-organizational collaboration right. And we're very excited about sharing these findings with you today. But before we do so, I want to hear from you one more time to understand your organization's orientation today around cross-organizational collaboration. So we understand we have strategy and we have marketing, we have innovation with us today, and we have larger organizations. What is that organization's orientation around cross-organizational collaboration? So we have 3 statements for you to choose from in question 1. And then overall, we'd like to know, how much would you say your company encourages and values cross-organizational collaboration today? When we think we have a quorum, feel free to show the results. Okay, so a lot of sometimes, a couple of most or all, and everybody seems to value it at least a little, but only one doesn't value or encourage it much. Very interesting. And chat is now enabled, by the way, if you want to add any commentary to that. In the meantime, it is now my pleasure to introduce you to Christine Brandt-Jones again, who's going to talk a little bit about the methodology for this year's research. Christine?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tony. So this year, as with previous years, our methodology is pretty thorough. We have 2 components: executive interviews, which is a qualitative approach. We had conversations with 20 plus people across industries, functional role, geographies, and also transformation maturity. So we had some folks, some companies who are at the beginning of their journeys, their transformation journeys, some who are at the end of one and may really be looking to start a new phase, but have gone through a good deal of the process. And then on the quantitative side, we had 1,000 plus participants across multiple geographies: the US, UK, Germany, China, and this year we added Singapore and Vietnam. You can see that the number of employees, the size of the firms range from 250 employees all the way to 10,000 plus. We have a range of industries and also a range of seniority within the organizations. And this year we've tended to stay in the C-suite, but given the nature of collaboration and that it really is a vertical participatory experience, we wanted to include managers and VPs as well. So we had a slightly broader sample set this year. We first begin with, what does collaboration offer to these organizations? And we see that there are basically 3 buckets of advantage or benefit. And overall, we see that really good, strong collaboration generates many more diverse ideas, creates a creative culture, gets more solutions flowing, strengthens the overall performance of not just the firm, but also the individual, which we'll talk about, and also deepens the overall resilience of the firm, which is interesting, particularly now we're all facing a lot of turbulence, a lot of change in the markets, in our industries, trying to face the challenges of operating under COVID. So this notion of collaboration being not only a high performance driver, but also a strengthener of an organization's ability to respond to changes out in the world. So the first area that we see is that organizations are able to manage challenging times more effectively when they collaborate. So we find that it creates more confidence. It builds resilience among changes, which I've talked about. And we're also anticipating that, having gone through a 2-3 year period, organizations that have been collaborating all along are now in a much better position to anticipate and operate effectively through what we're anticipating to be some level of economic downturn, likely globally. The second area is this notion of creating a much more psychologically safe environment for employees sort of this notion of more effective teaming and more effective collaboration just unlocks people's ability to sort of trust each other and start to challenge the way things are done as they find their peers and like-minded folks, or maybe, are engaging in really active conversations that are generating new ideas and are allowing them to say, yeah, why have we been doing it that way? Let's see if we can find a better way of tackling this problem. And the final, this is an active resilience. The final is this notion of creating greater efficiency and allowing employees to focus on what matters most. So we're in this together. Let's figure out our set of priorities. Let's agree on what those are and get those done. And that generates much higher productivity. It allows employees to consider what the strategic goals of the organization are, and then how do we most effectively tackle those strategic goals? Again, focusing on what's going to matter most, what's going to move the needle faster. And then finally, this sense of collaboration, the psychological safety, the building of resilience ultimately results in higher employee satisfaction and retention. So you can see that collaboration is a really powerful tool when done effectively. All right, so we're going to go through the impact of effective collaboration. The first thing that we looked at, and which was pretty intriguing for us, and we'd love to hear from you all on what you think, because we've all experienced some form of this over the last couple of years, is that there's really no one way of coming together to collaborate. And we've tested 3 different modes. One is working in the same room, which is historically what we've all done, and we've all have experience with that. And then 2 newer versions, the working remotely, which again, COVID forced us to do, where everyone was working remotely. We've had some versions of hybrid in the past, but we haven't had that full extreme of everyone working 100% remote. And then we have hybrid in the middle. And what we can see is that each of these modes offers some degree of effectiveness in collaboration, but all of them, even working in the same room, which we've had the most experience with, offer some opportunity. There's some headroom in all of these. And the other thing that we've seen is that there really isn't a let's all always work in the same room, let's all always work remotely. There are some situations where collaboration is best done all in the same room, but there are other situations where hybrid and working remotely may work just fine. So the challenge for the organizations and leaders is to allow some flexibility so that the teams can adjust and flex to what is going to be the most effective mode for them, given the circumstances that they're working in. And again, any interpretations from you all? We've all sort of been in this together. I'd love to hear any thoughts that you may have. What's worked best for you? Does this surprise you? It did surprise us quite a bit that working in the same room was only about 50% who say it's effective, which means that there's another 50% who aren't so sure how effective it is. And there's a full 28 to 33%, those are roughly statistically tied, of folks who said, yeah, hybrid is actually working pretty well. And of course, the majority are saying not so much. But again, it was interesting to see that it has had some effectiveness. Okay, if there isn't anything from the group, I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Erin Myers.
Yes, and hopefully my internet continues to cooperate at least a little bit. So apologies for that and appreciate everyone's patience. I'm excited to walk you through our new collaboration Flywheel, which is, as Tony mentioned, the primary output of this year's report and research. And this Flywheel really reveals a path for leaders and their organizations to prioritize and accelerate. That's why we love the model of a flywheel. Accelerate their efforts to build this collaborative muscle that we believe is so important for all of the reasons that Christine was walking us through. And this metaphor of a flywheel, we think, really helps capture a lot of the complexity that is, inherent for such an adaptive system, such as an organization made up of humans, just like Tony was talking about with our human-centered transformation model. There's a lot at play and a lot of complexity when all these humans come together and work together. And a flywheel really works by reinforcing positive behaviors and outcomes and minimizing some of those more negative feedback loops. And so a flywheel actually builds momentum over time, and it helps, maintain that momentum. And so that's why this is different than a maturity model, where an entire organization, typically is at one point and moves up to the next step and moves up to the next step, and it's very static. This is really about moving through the cycles faster. And we found this year that, the most effective organizations really progress their understanding of collaboration over time and through experience. And our research, we heard it in our qualitative and also in our quantitative survey. The research suggests that this, progressive understanding really happens over 3 phases. And that's what you're seeing here on the page, starting with coordination, moving into cooperation, and finally landing in collaboration. And each one, as I was just mentioning about a flywheel versus a maturity model, it paves the way for success in the next stage, and ultimately, accelerates that ability to effectively collaborate across an organization. It's not just about collaborating for the sake of collaborating, but it's that, how is it effective? What results is it driving? And so you may notice just quickly as you scan this image that there are these little icons sprinkled around the flywheel, and they relate back to what Tony introduced us to with the human-centered transformation model, where we have little DNA, mind, body, and soul icons. And so what our quantitative research really helped us do is understand what are the actionable drivers that enable each of these phases to work effectively, and as I've mentioned, pave the way for the next. So over the next several pages, we'll click into each of these phases in a little bit more detail. Happy to explain the drivers and show what we've seen in our experience with clients and in our research that these drivers really look like in practice. So we'll certainly start with coordination. This is where many organizations we've found begin their, developmental journey. And the opportunity to coordinate really happens when, otherwise siloed or vertical teams, they find a reason to align around a reason to work together horizontally, so together and across, versus in their typical siloed lanes, if you will. And so when leaders, if we look over to the right on these drivers, when the leaders are the ones promoting this, clear reason for working together and what we're trying to achieve, and employees are building a shared understanding of why we need to do this together and we can't accomplish it just alone or within our traditional ways of working, because it connects to something broad, you start to be able to facilitate just the beginnings of collaboration, which again, we're articulating as coordination. And so teams understand, where to collaborate at this point, how to contribute. So there's clarity and alignment on the definition of success and what good looks like, because this is a new way of working in many cases. And so what I think helps bring this to life the most are these ideas or examples in practice. Above is the research-based theory, if you will. But some of these examples, I think, span a range of, easier to implement or smaller scale, and some larger. So I'm happy to walk through a couple of those, but you're free to scan the list as well. I think the third one down on this list is really interesting and sometimes overlooked: the importance of creating a shared vocabulary, whether it's an entire lexicon or just a few terms that are used really frequently within teams. It just helps these groups who otherwise don't interact, maybe don't have the same acronyms, maybe don't have the same metrics or things they're paying attention to. It creates that common footing so that we're able to have a conversation and really know what the other is saying and understand one another to best, understand what we're working towards together. And the fourth one I really love and is really important to something that Christine was talking about in her second point around psychological safety. From the outset at this, embarkment with coordination, it's really important to have leaders help define success, not just by, what we're trying to achieve or what the outcome is or what the goal is. That's very important. But it's equally important to define success by what we're trying to learn through this process, because everything presents an opportunity to learn and grow. So this brings us into our second phase of our flywheel, which is, by gaining this clear understanding of how an individual's work fits into that broader strategy, this bigger goal we're trying to tackle together, and we learn to coordinate. These functional groups create the potential to cooperate. And this is something that was really interesting in our research, and unfortunate is not all sees this opportunity. It's a progressive, right, over time and through experience. And so cooperation really requires trust, real and embedded in ways of working and ways of interacting. And so groups have to really, those otherwise siloed teams have to really proactively work to understand what are the group's collective capabilities, and then establish, clearer roles and decision-making responsibilities. And this is really the who and the how of the collaborative effort. So again, clarity is so important here. And once you have this shared ambition, you've got the common fact base, the capabilities, we understand how we're working together and not just handing off between. This is where participants, we found in our research, start to perceive the value of coordination and the value of a shared effort more so than sort of those traditional and typical ways of working. And from that poll, I see that many of you on the line right now already work in organizations that do value this way of working. So you might already have a jump start and naturally sort of fall into this cooperative bucket. So how does this come to life? Just a bit of a longer list, but I'll just pick a few to highlight. If I look down maybe at the fourth one, so I think it's really important to break, these large projects or new challenges into manageable parts, and have someone accountable for each one. I think that's something that really helps with role clarity, and it's still familiar to have an owner and a decision, someone who's responsible for the decisions of each of the work. It just helps clarify. I think the sixth is also really interesting towards the bottom, actually the last one, which is building a transferable skill set for employees. This will set individuals up to be able to focus areas because they have a skill set that is able to be transferred. And so it's not as shocking each time they try and collaborate with a new group. So finally, we move into our last phase. So once we've got proactive, cooperation, and we've built the context across these otherwise disparate and separate teams, interdependence and synergy really shine in this phase. And so it's in this third stage that the process of piloting and embedding new ways of working, just as Christine was highlighting towards the end of that 3-part page, it's really celebrated alongside the outcomes. So again, underscoring what we saw in coordination, where outcomes are better, and we're celebrating the fact that we've tried a new process and a new way of engaging. So teammates are now generating new ideas together, but they're also bringing much needed objectivity and clarity to the process and to the work. And these cross-organizational teams reach what we call flow, which, we dig into a little bit more in last year's research with the change fitness model that Tony referenced. And again, this is where, quality and productivity really shine, which we'll touch on in just a moment. And so what's really important is, as these teams, I've started to hit on it a bit, but as these teams are looking for new ways to work together, and to Christine's point, not all the time, and collaboration doesn't have to be the default, but if you have that critical lens of where is this way of working best fit, what are the types of challenges and problems and business opportunities that we're trying to, make progress on, where is a collaborative effort more necessary or able to drive us a better outcome? And so teams are actually feeling more emboldened to experiment and to, think about where traditional ways of working no longer serve, the needs of the organization. So a couple of examples here just to bring that home. So the first one I think is, we see it not often enough in some of the work we do with clients around their planning, is we recommend actually an integrated planning process where functions, rather than just planning in a vacuum and thinking about what is it that I need and what is unique to my function, actually bringing that to their peers and being able to share wins and risks and goals and priorities, and in that moment identify areas of misalignment or interdependence, and together reprioritize and help understand how can we get there together. The last one I'll highlight is the bottom one here, which is something we help our clients with a lot in their transformation efforts, which is to stand up an empowered transformation management office and empower some findings more specific to China and Southeast Asia regions. But if you have any questions on the model in general, we'll start to build more client stories and real world examples in. But feel free to put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them as we go along.
And thanks, Evan, for introducing the flywheel. And as we take a deeper look into the study, and as we're sitting at the region in Asia Pacific, there are some specific nuances when we think about applying this and enable better collaboration in the region. So in the next 10 or 15 minutes, we would like to share some top-line observations we have seen in the region and what could be the potential reason for these observations in Asia. So on this slide, you can see, compare on the higher level compared to other regions, we do see some commonalities when we think about what are the benefits of better collaboration. For example, higher productivity, achieve strategic goals, and greater employee satisfaction. But there are some unique nuances. We see there was a higher score in Asia compared to US and Europe. Specifically, these two highlighted here. One is about driving more innovation product and services. And second is related to that is accelerating speed to market and accelerating outcome and impact. So if we think about the unique context in Asia, one thing to remember is this is a very dynamic region. In the past 20 years, we have seen both huge changes rapidly in both economic development and society changes. And that's why being able to really learn from each other, collaborate, and innovate, get that speed to market and drive impact is super important for both consumers and companies. So in the next few slides, we would like to share a few deep dive learning. And before going into that, one unique character we would like to remind everyone here about Southeast Asia specifically is how this district, this region is actually a very diverse set of countries and cultures. And that's why collaboration is even more important in this region, just because of this unique context. A few character, if we see here, number one, of course, is varying culture and language background of employees. We have employees operating in very different languages and cultures. Think about the different culture and languages in South Asia. There is also a different level of both economic development across region and then also different level of digital transformation. And that brings both opportunities and challenges in better collaboration. And lastly, and very importantly here, it's for multinational organizations. If we think about the reporting and collaboration within this, across global headquarters to regional team, the APAC regional team to country team. This is important because when global team, the collaboration is only enabled with the regional team, the region, that when the HQ speak to APAC, APAC is actually a set of very different countries. So how do we better enable the collaboration of HQ, regional level, and different market level is super important here as well. So on the next slide, let's talk about the first observation we have. So this first observation here, if we look at the data, we actually see Southeast Asia and China companies really value collaboration. On the left hand side of the slide, this chart shows the percentage of companies values encourage collaboration a lot versus a little bit. And you can see the rating here is significantly higher than other region. And then on the right is the percentage of them actually think they're currently effective at doing so. And if you recall what we just shared about how dynamic this region is, it's not surprising that collaboration is even more important and people are encouraging it more. But interestingly here, we actually see not only they think it's important, for companies in China, they're also seeing they're actually quite effective already at doing so. And Tom, do you have any insight here of why this could happen?
Sure. I think, first of all, talking about why Chinese enterprise value collaboration so much, you got to think about the context, right? To your point, Lily, the market is so dynamic, so fast evolving. So the Chinese company have to move fast. They cannot afford to not collaborate within their house. But also, quite interestingly, I would mention Chinese companies, a lot of them really have this kind of growth-driven mindset, always looking at where they can innovate from product service standpoint, what's a new business opportunity area, new categories to enter. So for them, actually, cross-business collaboration is not just something nice to have, it's actually a critical source of competitive strengths, because from collaboration, they can leverage shared capabilities, they can leverage the data capabilities, and of course, they can leverage their user base, right, to collectively increase the value to drive with the consumers. So that's the whole notion why the value is so much. Now, when it comes to why a lot of those things, they are quite effective. If you think about smaller companies, some of our clients were telling us, they're really making sure that they have a nimble organization, meaning all the functions literally sit next to each other, and leadership makes very clear to the cross-functional management team. It's super important for them to be transparently collaborate. So that sort of notion is very clear when it comes to for those smaller companies. And for the bigger companies, in recent years, there has been strong push to set up what they call as horizontal, sort of a middle offices, as they call, essentially the capabilities they set up that they can use again and again across different business units. So newer business can always leverage something they already accumulated in the past to continue to incubate the new business because of the structure of the middle offices they set up. So that's why a lot of them seeing themselves being quite effective in terms of harnessing collaboration.
Great. And one more example on the next slide, similar to what Thomas just mentioned. This one is in Singapore. Singapore's GovTech actually adopts a very flat, tech-led organizational structure, and they're actually giving semi-autonomy to subgroups, and this really helped them to encourage and enable a sense of learning agility and collaboration. The second observation here is when we think about connecting individual employee work and their behaviors to a higher order business strategy and company purpose, and we think about the bar chart here show the level of importance versus how effective they're currently doing so. We actually see in both China and Southeast Asia, it's really, really important to connect employee work to business strategy. And although there is a bigger gap of percentage of company think they're currently doing a good job. So there was opportunity, but we do see the percentage is higher in both China and Southeast Asia compared to other regions that they believe they're already doing so. They're already connecting individual employee work to business strategy. And one reason, and it's very culture related here, is in Asia, both China and Southeast Asia, we do have a higher sense of the idea of collectivism. It's about sharing a common goal in the organization, in their community, in their family. And that's why within the organization it's also important for individuals themselves to feel this level of collectivism. And Tom, any idea of why China scored high on aligning this one?
Yeah, I think interestingly, I see coexistence of two approaches. One is more regarding traditional enterprises. If you think about state-owned enterprises or even some of the older tech companies like Huawei, right? The approach they take is very detailed planning, top-down, structural, detailed processes. So every individual inside the organization see how they fit, where they fit into the bigger purpose. Now, looking on the other side, if you look at some of the digital economy players, or even the new generation of consumer brand organizations in China, they're very much around bottom-up, agile iteration, encourage them to constantly look at new opportunities, define opportunities, then think about ways to solve the puzzles. So very much around this notion of, own your path, right? So individuals has ownership in terms of defining the purpose in a sense. So I think that's sort of coexistent of the traditional way and the newer way, sort of feel why you see higher percentage, of Chinese enterprise seeing the effective in connecting the dots between individual and higher purpose.
Great. And one more example on the next slide is MB Bank. They're actually one of our very important clients. They have started the journey of transforming the business a couple of years ago. And one of the first things they have done for the leadership to really drive is redefining the purpose, the brand purpose, the promise it gives to its retail bank customers, and aligning the whole organization to this new purpose, connecting the behaviors of individual employee behaviors, activities to this new brand purpose. And this really helped this legacy brand transform itself and drive efficiency of its new operating model and cross-organization coordination. And the last observation we have here, important for Southeast Asia and China companies, is how do we enable better collaboration? And one important factor here is aligning incentives that encourage collaboration. What we see in the chart here on the left is how important it is, how important incentive alignment is. So super important. On the right is the percentage of people think they're actually effective at doing so. The gap is too big, so there was room to catch up. But similarly, we're observing in both China and Southeast Asia, it's super important, and some companies, higher percentage of companies, is already doing so. And here, the top line observation we have is in more developing economies, where the market grows, the natural macro economy is growing fast. Monetary incentives, like in Vietnam, is usually prioritized. But in more stable, mature, developed economy like Singapore, soft incentives start to play a bigger role, where we see benefits, training, recognition, etc. And Tom, any insight here on China?
I think this goes back to the point around pragmatism. I think leaders understand, right? If the incentives are not aligned, then the collaboration is not going to happen. So that pragmatism is really there as a foundation to drive incentive alignment. And then recently, we saw a lot of around structural sort of alignment as well. So a lot of companies use this OKR system and making sure cross-functional OKR are linked. And interestingly, one of our ex-clients was just telling us last week, right, as now CMO of an organization, her OKR was not just about brand marketing, but there are elements to support our e-commerce business GMV. There was component to support cost reduction. I was asking her, why is that the case? She was saying it was clear from the top leadership, from the CEO, that all the leaders must collaborate to make things happen, right? So structurally, they also have this sort of OKR system, really making sure all the incentives measurements are there to facilitate cross-functional collaboration.
Great. One more example here is HSBC. Some of our team members actually have worked very closely with HSBC in the past 5 years. One big move this organization have done is merge retail banking, wealth management, and global private banking into a whole new global unit. And this, they're also bringing the OKR system, as Tom mentioned, to really encourage better collaboration, understanding of each other's key objectives and key results. And this allows greater operational efficiency, especially if we think about the consumer insight, gathering research, and think about the growth moves when they face their retail banking customer across different value tiers, from mass affluent, premier level, and high net worth level. So yeah, that's the few key double clicks we would like to share within the region, and just want to bring back the flywheel we just shared before, the data, to really think about how can the region work close together to close the gap and reap the benefit of stronger organization collaboration, and think about evaluate which phase of the flywheel are your organization on, and what could be the key levers you can pull to build collaborative muscles.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lily and Tom. That was terrific. So we'd like to close tonight sharing a quick story to walk through the flywheel inside of a single client. For those of you who might not be familiar, CVS is known primarily in the US originally as one of the largest pharmacy retailers in the United States. Over time, they acquired a large insurer, Aetna, and Caremark, which is a pharmacy benefits manager. And today, they're actually number 4 in the Fortune 500. So they're one of the largest organizations in the world. A few years ago, they decided that they wanted to try to disrupt the state of affairs in renal care, in kidney care. And after they've been after that for a couple of years, they weren't meeting their goals. And they asked us to support them in trying to put the transformation back on track and accelerate their work. Now, Aaron spoke a little bit about how one of the most important things when you need to start in the flywheel of coordination is getting people aligned around what are we doing and how are we going to do it. And in this case, we brought cross-functional representatives from all across the organization to generate a set of new ways of working. This was very important to them because the traditional organization operates like a very big Fortune 400, 500 company. And what they needed to really be was more like a startup that just happens to be inside one of the largest companies in the world. So they created a set of 5 ways of working, which they collectively called their culture of courage, that encouraged them to reach across the silos that they had and act as one team, to lead fearlessly and act boldly, to empower ownership at all levels of the organization, to accelerate their innovation by embracing ambiguity, which traditionally would slow them down if they weren't clear, instead working iteratively through that, and of course, putting the patient at the heart of everything that they did. In terms of increasing cooperation, they were quite stuck in the silos of their organization. So we took everyone who was focused on developing new products and services and people who needed to be focused on addressing specific business challenges, and we lifted them out of their traditional structures and created what we called a pods and squads model. Pods were cross-functional teams focused on tackling a specific challenge. How might we accelerate care services revenue, for instance, or how might we build out and scale a new line of business? And then the squads were the functions from which we were drawing those capabilities. We often say that in product and service design, you need 5 key capabilities. We call them DERPA: design, engineering, research, product or service management, and analytics and data science. When you're missing one of those, things tend to go wrong. So we organized them that way and then pushed decision-making down into those pods to accelerate the work. They were quite accustomed to pushing everything up. And instead, we empowered those teams to move forward. In terms of increasing collaboration itself, we created a set of rituals around all of the pods and squads together. So we broke the work into 4-month work increments, and within that, 2-week sprints. And at the beginning and the end of every one of those 2-week sprints, the leaders from all the pods got together to plan the work for the next 2 weeks and to change whatever they needed to change in terms of what was in their work plan. And most importantly, the sprint closeouts, and you see a little photo in the upper right-hand corner, brought together people from across all of the pods and squads to see the work in progress. So not to show some beautiful prepared deliverable, but to show where they were in that moment and to get feedback across those different work streams and make sure that things were staying aligned. And that was a very powerful way for the group to reinforce the collaboration and also to contribute even across their pods to keep things on track. This accelerated the work beyond really, I think, what any of them had ever imagined. At the end of it, one of the very kind clients actually cried on one of our calls and said, "I didn't think it was possible, but you fixed our culture which I have to say was one of the most wonderful things I've ever been a witness to. Now, we've talked a lot about the teams right here. It's also really important to talk about the leaders. And one of the things that came out of the research is that we know that senior leaders must role model what the effort is needed and what success looks like, and recognize people who are contributing to that. One of the things that we learned in the research is that leaders generally thought that they were collaborating very well in their organizations, but managers, not so much. And that's very important. It suggests that there's a need to focus on that, as we may have said before, winning in the middle, bringing everybody in where it looks like it's hard because there's so many people, and make sure that all of those people are truly engaged and see what leaders are doing and hear from them how important it was. Going back to our CVS Kidney Care example again for a minute, one of the things that was so powerful about the closeouts was the number of senior leaders who showed up to praise the work in progress and to give people encouragement to keep moving quickly and not to slow down and wait for their authority to do more work. That was incredibly powerful, and it really advanced what they were capable of doing and ultimately brought them back on track in terms of delivery of their commitments to the organization. Finally, one of the most important things that came out of the research this year is that cross-organizational collaboration has benefits to the organization in terms of higher productivity and achieving those strategic goals. And it also has really important benefits to everyone who's participating in that. People are able to learn new skills and gain new knowledge and work better across the organization because they have those new skills and knowledge, and that allows them to thrive. So what leaders get out of that by encouraging that is greater employee satisfaction and higher retention, which, as we know these days, is critically important. So that's what we have to share with you today. Thank you very much for your sustained focus and attention. We'd be pleased to answer any questions you might have. We have a few minutes left if anything is on your minds. We will be sharing the presentation afterwards, so you all have access to it. And we'll have all of our contact information should you want to continue the dialogue with any individuals here. You're very welcome. Thank you, Selma. Appreciate the feedback. Okay. I don't want to belabor the point. If nobody has any questions today, we will let you continue on with your days. Thank you again on behalf of Prophet and my colleagues for joining us. We're grateful for your being here with us today, and we hope that you will join us for future events where we share more of what comes out of the Catalysts program. Thank you so much.